Okay, great. So thank you for joining us at this Giesen webinar today, Friday. It's a beautiful day outside. The sun is almost coming out here in San Rafael, California. Next to me is Valerian Rala, my friend and colleague in coffee. Valerian will be joining us. And today we have an exciting program. We have also, with our colleagues from Giesen, we have been able to develop some gift boxes specifically for those of you who have been submitting questions for this webinar, questions related to your coffee business, and it is still not too late to submit your questions. And then when we come to the end of this webinar, we will do a little raffle to determine who is going to receive these gift boxes that are really, really cool with some beautiful Giesen paraphernalia, and that will help you also to conduct your business better. And so more about that towards the end of this webinar. For today, which is kind of the last format webinar as we have been doing it the past 24 months, today we are going to share you 10 tips that will help you to become more innovative, more successful, more, I would say, happier in conducting your business. Valerian and I, we will be sharing our personal advice, our professional advice, as we have been doing that already through our coffeecourses.com online training program, and also here at the Boot Coffee campus. Here we have an ongoing array of courses from Roasting Lab Pro, which is a course that Valerian has been leading very successfully, or the Q programs, where you can become certified as a sommelier of coffee, as a Q grader. And this year we will also get back to our origin courses that we are teaching both in Ethiopia, which will be scheduled later in November of this year, and then Panama, which will be scheduled in January 2023. So there's a lot going on. We have a thriving community coming here to the campus, and I'm very stoked here to present these 10 topics that Valerian and I have been choosing carefully for today's webinar. We're not going to bore you too much with keynotes and PowerPoints, but we're going to really use a good old clipboard with some of the key topics. And so let's get this started. We have 10 tips, and tip number 1, take care of your people. Why is this top of the list? Because we are worldwide, we are dealing with a labor market that is kind of out of sync. It is very hard for coffee businesses to hire people, to maintain their staff. And when you put all this training in your staff, that creates a cost, specifically for coffee businesses where, like yours, where you're dealing with specialized roasters, cuppers, quality specialists. So our advice, our tip of the day, our tip for this webinar is invest in your people. Recognize the importance of your staff because they're an asset for your company. This is key. Labor cost is also rising. Like here in San Francisco, the average hourly wage of a barista is beyond $20 per hour. Some of our clients have to pay their baristas $30 per hour or even more. The same is for roasting staff. While the number of roasting companies is increasing quite dramatically, the training programs cannot really keep up with training all these people. We're trying our best as Boot Coffee, but finding new staff is a challenge. So you have to really avoid getting in a pinch where your key staff, your technical staff, your staff that is focusing on your customer service is suddenly leaving. So that was tip of the day. Tip number 1 of the day. Um, Tip number 2, this goes directly at the heart of also what is going on the global front, where we are dealing with an uncertain situation, whether or not specifically countries in Europe will have an ongoing access to their gas. Most roasting machines today are gas powered. Fortunately, Giesen has been investing in coffee roasting machines that use electric, and I'm going to have Valerian comment on this, but this is also in the perspective that as a roasting company, as a coffee company, you will want to reduce your environmental impact. That means that you can source coffees that have been produced using so-called climate smart agricultural techniques, using more shade, preserving the aquifers in the countries. That helps our colleague producers to also maintain their sustainable goals at origin. But specifically, when we come to the roasting side, Valerian, what is your perspective on electrically heated roasting machines? Why is it important specifically for our audience in Europe nowadays to consider this? And how can Giesen potentially help these folks in that regard?
So, if you listen to my podcast, coffees.me, you know that I'm not a big fan of electric roasters, never been, but the situation is changing. In Europe right now, we have a horrible war with Russia and Ukraine, right? And that situation jeopardizes the flow of natural gas into Europe. And especially Central Europe is very dependent on that gas. So even me, who has a tiny, tiny small company in Central Europe, thinking, how can I, be not dependent on natural gas or propane, right? And I was looking into electric roasters, and it's amazing that Giesen is working on a 15 kilo electric roaster, because there are some electric roasters out there which are smaller capacity, but if you want to make business, not to play with a roaster, so you need certain capacity to make money. And I think the 15 kilo is a very good size.
Yep. And I want to share a short video that our friends at Giesen, Willy Vasic, developed of my visit, and I'm going to try to share my screen to do this. And you should be able to see my screen. Willy, if you could confirm that. Okay, let me stop this again. 1 second. So I had the intense joy recently to visit my family in Holland, and also to visit my coffee family in Holland, which is the Giesen family. And Willy, can you confirm that we now see the beginning of the video? Great. And so I just want to share some impressions of my visit to Giesen. So very cool video. Why did I show this at this point? Because at this new headquarters of Giesen, there is going to be a major effort to help Giesen get ready to meet the demands of the near and the long-term future, specifically for the smaller roasting companies that use W6, W15, W30, and that size. And electric roasting will have an important part in that. Valerian mentioned, he is not a personal fan of electric roasting. I have had also mixed experiences in the past, but the cool thing is Giesen is addressing this by specifically solving some of the traditional challenges that electric roasters can have when roasting coffee. And we would love to tell you more about this, but given the actual political situation, the global situation, it is very important that you start thinking about alternatives to your energy supply for your roasting company for that reason. If you're interested in this, please reach out to your local Giesen representative. We expect that there will be a major surge in interest for these machines. So getting yourself on top of the list is probably very important. Having said that, we're going to go through to our next tip. Tip number 3. Follow the coffee waves. Now, what do I mean with this? We've had, over the past 30 plus years, we've had various waves in specialty coffee. The third wave brought us micro lots, direct relationships with producers. And we have already entered into the fourth wave that came specifically with the pandemic that brought coffee consumption more back to the homes of the consumers. And I think, Valeria, that's an exciting development, and that can also get us into the fifth wave. What is the fifth wave for coffee, for specialty coffee?
Well, I think that my opinion is that it's different interesting concepts there. One is especially the new processes are super popular. Again, personally, I'm a bit confused because I like the terroir. I'm very much the third, maybe fourth wave guy, but that can be interesting. But I think also that we're going back to the regular Joe who drinks regular coffee, and they are also, maybe they are not interested in the terroir, maybe they're not interested in processes, but definitely want to know where the coffee comes from, who roasted and how they roast it. So I think that would be a big shift on a budget coffees too.
Yeah, and so the fifth wave, as I predicted also, it will allow the consumer to truly build the experience at home. Brewing devices are in the making, brewing solutions are in the making. We've been testing some of these. Just the other day, this week, we visited a company, a tech startup that has an integrated solution for roasting, grinding, and brewing, all to be made available to the consumer at their homes. That brings us to the fourth tip of this webinar, which is a tip that we often propagate. And you have to cup, and cup. Now, we have shared this concept, the importance of cupping, many times in the webinars. Here at Boot Coffee Campus, we are teaching cupping programs in various forms. I feel that cupping and roast profiling should always go hand in hand. You should never let the cupping protocols up to coincidence. You should always be on top of your flavor profiles, specifically nowadays, where we have these exciting new processed coffees coming out. Valerian briefly mentioned this. I'm going to mention this more. So it's now more important than ever to cup your coffees very well. I don't know if you have a comment on this.
Yeah, I love that you emphasize that, because we have so many roasting students who come here to learn to roast, and when we come to the cupping, they don't know how to cup, and they say, oh, maybe I don't need this. And I always say to them that, hey, come back for the sensory class, later for the your Q grader class, Because if you don't know how to taste your coffee, how can you be chef? Imagine that you cook something and you don't know how to taste it, right? It's the same when you roast. You need to know how to cup and taste your coffee.
And connected with the cupping, it's also the importance of the inspection of the coffee beans, the grading, as we call it in English. Why? Because your coffee supplier, your importer, or whoever you're buying your coffees from might present that coffee, or very likely presents that coffee, as a specialty coffee. When you do your grading protocol, which is the protocol that is well defined by the SCA, you can validate whether or not this coffee is really prepared as a specialty coffee. That I think is very essential, because if you find in your sample that you receive from your supplier distinct secondary or primary defects, then you can also expect to find those same imperfections back in your coffee that you get from your supplier in bulk. Coming back to the cupping, always cup blind. You should explore the cupping form that Boot Coffee developed, which you can download if you go to bootcoffee.com/resources. There's a whole database of various resources. This cupping form is basically the SCA form with cupping attributes integrated, and it helps you to document what you taste. The other day we were cupping this week all these samples from Yemen. We are actually, Boot Coffee is supporting the National Yemen Coffee Auction organized by the Mocha Institute. And I was explaining also the panel of cuppers that when it comes to cupping coffee, you have to try to listen to the story that the coffee is telling you. That's, in poetic terms, what you're really trying to do as a cupper. Nowadays, with green coffee prices being significantly higher than ever before, the importance of validating the value of your coffee in the cup as a coffee buyer is key. Let's go to tip number 5 of this webinar. And that's, of course, one that goes at the heart of what we are trying to do at Giesen, is understand your roasting profiles. Now, roasting profiles, if you Google the term roasting profile, you'll find thousands and thousands of links. There has been written a lot about this by various experts. Understanding roasting profiles also means that you should not just blindly focus on your digital roast profiler. Giesen has a wonderful roast profiling software that is very soon to be updated. I've seen the first version of that. It's very, very beautiful interface. But I also I challenge you to understand your roasting profiles beyond what your computer is registering. And where it comes to the rate of rise, and where it comes to understanding how you choose your start temperatures, how you choose your in-between batches temperatures, all of these elements have to be understood, rather than that you just use a profiler like the Giesen profiler to do this for you. And so do you actually know when your coffee beans go from what is called the drying cycle into the cycle of the Maillard reactions? Do you know what the Maillard reactions consist of? Have you ever experimented with different durations for this Maillard reactions? We have found out in our trials here at Boot Coffee Campus, using our Giesen machines, we found out that the Maillard reactions are at the core of flavor development, specifically when you are trying to roast profile coffees with these new fermentation protocols. How about roasting coffees with a soak or with a shock profile? And so all these elements, all these aspects are key. And I'm sure, Valerian, with your experience also teaching here, the Roasting Lab Pro courses at Boot Coffee Campus, there's probably some information you would like to share about this.
So I love that when you approach this, you did not give answers, simply because sometimes the answers are different with different coffees. And you have to realize is that coffee is an agricultural product. It has its agricultural variations. So there's no recipe really. There's experimentation and there's a lot of playing around and develop your profiles and be surprised all the time. We are surprised on our courses when we tell you that, oh, this coffee most likely will behave like that. And it doesn't, because it's a different coffee. So that's my tip. Don't get surprised.
Yeah, I would say, so your company, what you're doing in your company, the investigation you do, the protocols you develop should be part of your efforts. Don't always blindly trust what experts write down as the golden rules of roasting, because, you know, coffee is not that simple. And you should tailor roasting profiles to your needs, for your products, for your markets, for your clientele, and for the coffees you buy. And these special process protocols, these new fermentation protocols, they kind of change everything in the coffee chain, from processing, from roasting to brewing to the barista techniques. And that's very exciting. And I'm also happy to tell you that we are, with our friends at Giesen, with the new headquarters, we're going to put an effort into place as a roasting machine manufacturer to be more on top of these new developments, which I think will be really interesting, and you will be able to understand and read more about this. Let's go on to the next tip number 6. And here we have tip number 6: follow innovations and trends like special process, cold brew coffee, and other innovations and trends. It's surprising here in the US, the west coast of the US, which is usually a hotbed for tech startups, for new technologies that are coming into the economy. It's surprising, it's amazing to see what's happening here in the coffee industry. So Valerian, why do you feel it is so important to be on top of innovations and trends as a roasting company?
Well, obviously your customers expect from you the newest, the latest, right? Because you are a specialty coffee roasting company. But you know, other thing is, like, I just gave you an example. I was just visiting Europe and I went to Budapest, Bratislava, and my little town, Komárno, in presentations with Lamula. And sometimes I felt like on a moon, because they had all the technologies which we, let's say, don't know in the United States. But if I mention them, our technologies in the United States, like ground control, we are so proud of that. They didn't know about that. So I think being on top of the game all the time on maybe both continents is a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah, in one of our previous webinars, we shared a segment of the ground control brewing technology, which is here behind us in our lab. There are a lot of cool innovations going on where it comes to brewing. And I'm going to share you a video that I took just a couple of days ago while we were doing some experimentation with a really cool, innovative brewing technology for cold brew coffee. But I also just recently, 2 weeks ago, I visited Ethiopia. In Ethiopia, there is a farm called Gesha Village Estate, which is a farm I helped develop. I helped start almost 10 years ago. And during the past 4 years, we have started to really experiment and dive into special fermentation and drying protocols. I already mentioned previously how that is a game changer for the industry, because as a result of these special fermentation protocols, I can mention anaerobic fermentation, I can mention carbonic maceration, I can mention extended drying protocols, and then there is a array of variations of all these protocols coming together. So as a result of that, for example, in anaerobic fermentation, green coffee beans can be literally soaked in juice, in so-called mosto, the juice of the cherries. And that by itself, that process by itself, very much changes the makeup of the coffee bean at the cellular level. Now, you might think, why is that relevant? Because I'm just doing my roasting profile and I'm just, repeating the profiles I always do. The thing is that as a result of these protocols, which are beyond a stage of experimentation in the industry, they're becoming part of the new normal. So as a result of these new fermentation protocols, the makeup of the beans at the cellular level has been dramatically and is dramatically changing. We are starting to dive into this by understanding this better, studying the cellular composition of coffee beans that have been processed with and without these protocols, and we see some stunning changes, specifically where it comes to how the cell walls of the green coffee bean, how rigid or how elastic they become when there is fermentation protocols applied and extended drying protocols. So that means when at the cellular level, things change, then while water vapors during the roasting process in the drying phase start to migrate through the cellular structure of the bean, these water vapors, they create pressure. That pressure also causes, with ongoing heat development, they cause the gases, the oils that are contained within the cellular structure that convert into gases. That migration of these gases together with the water vapor evolves very differently. And that is a game changer. So you cannot, as a roasting company, you cannot ignore these facts that are happening. And we are going to start with our friends at Giesen and here at Brewed Coffee Campus more in-depth experimentation with this, research also in collaboration with Gesha Village, also with our farms in Panama. We have a relatively new farm that has become operational the past year, which is called Finca La Cabra. Fincalacabra.com is the website. And so you can find with these coffees some new stunning evolutions that require as a roaster to follow different and to consider different protocols. Now, you probably might want me to tell you, okay, I want to give me the protocol for these coffees, but that's not how simple it is. This is evolving, and we are happy to develop the research for this. And so that's one example of an innovation, these special process protocols that are game changers. I want to share another short video with you that is really about cold brew coffee. And I think you probably know how important cold brew coffee has become worldwide. And for example, here in the US, cold brew coffee has become a multi-billion-dollar industry. Worldwide, we're talking about an industry that is valued at more than $10 billion retail level. And there's ongoing research in this realm. And there's one company that has developed a machine called the Ospra, which is a cold brew espresso machine. And I'm going to share you some impressions of my trials with Ospra here at Brewed Coffee Campus this past week. Really cool. That was the wrong video. Now we see. Willie, can you confirm you can see the screen correctly? Thank you, Willie.
Hello, my name is Yver. I am founder and director of coffee with Chromatic Coffee Company and head of coffee of Ozma. We're going to be talking about this little machine today. It is the Ozma Pro Model 1. It is a cold espresso machine and on-demand cold brew system. It operates very simply with a diaphragm pump, and that's about it, really, just some basic electronics. You're able to use an external water reservoir. We have it here filled with ice. We've already pre-chilled the group head a little bit. We have some coffee weighed out. It is some Geisha Village. So of course, we're here at Boot Coffee Campus, and been showing Willem a bunch of different trials with the machine, some products. It's really interesting because cold espresso has been conceptually thrown around, and I've attempted some other experiences or experiments without much success in terms of extraction yield and concentration. So this machine uses a lot of pressure, oscillation, like through harmonics, through the diaphragm pump. So it's not exactly brewing with sound, but it definitely is a form of controlled agitation. Since we're removing the heat energy from the system, we have to replace it with something else.
And so I just want to explain what we are looking at here. Hiver is founder of Chromatic Coffee Company, is also one of the founders of this Ospra cold brew espresso technology. And why is this so interesting? Because espresso, when it first came to existence almost 100 years ago, was an approach to brew coffee with hot water or water that is at a very high temperature to do this fast. It had never been considered to brew espresso coffee with cold water. And you might wonder, why would that not be possible? And that was Ospra's fundamental question: why not review the possibilities of extracting coffee using cold water? And for that purpose, they needed to completely change the technology, the pumps also, in order to facilitate this. And you're going to see some demonstration of this technology in a second.
Best option. So we're going to go ahead and pull this coffee. I have a Pullman 25 to 28 milligram, or 25 to 28 gram basket. I have 28 grams weighed out. I think the column of coffee really helps with the extraction. We'll see here.
And so why do you feel that roasters should consider this alternative style of preparation?
I think
taking away the heat.
I think somewhat jokingly, it's not getting any cooler. I think there's a lot of desire for cold beverages, and the cold beverage market has been growing exponentially. You see it with canned cold brew, for example, but I also feel as though this machine, with a lot of the new processes that have been developed recently in terms of anaerobic processing, in terms of carbonic macerations, yeast inoculations, and the different flavor profiles that those offer, focusing on what the producer and the processor are doing and the subtle qualities that are developed during those processes and through the roaster's interpretation, I think this does a better job at preserving a lot of those volatile aromatics that can often be lost with espresso, or just make it seem like another regular coffee. I think this does a much better job at highlighting the unique, specific processing and origin characteristic.
So Hiver also comes back again that this technology of cold brew espresso can be so relevant also in light of these game-changing new fermentation processing protocols that we see in the industry. I'm going to forward the video a little bit so you can see our actual extraction that we are doing. So this machine is basically,
as far as design,
fully-
this machine does
fully
not have
finished,
a three-way solenoid valve,
laboratory
so we don't run as much of a risk
machine
of.
that will
We can pump.
in the near future be available as a
Yeah,
consumer
and you can start seeing
machine
some of the beads that are
with
coming out.
possibly some more bells and whistles, but it's very cool.
So once we have a good diffusion, we want that water to penetrate the particulate. And then once we trigger the pump back on, what we're gonna see is essentially an attempt to rattle all the solubles out of that ground material. We do use a slightly finer grind than espresso to expose more of the solubles. But so you can see that the concentration is there. And again, I'm gonna just pump the cycle, or cycle the pump off and on a little bit just to get a better flow rate. This machine does operate at a pretty high pressure. This shot is a little constricted, but I think we're still gonna have, since there's no three-way solenoid valve, the physical approach of turning the pump off and on doesn't have as much of a negative impact, especially since we're dealing with ice cold water. So, gram shot. But it does have a lot of similarities physically to hot espresso. So I think that.
So why is this so interesting? Because the
Other things I found with
flavor of this coffee
profile
is really
so 18
compelling, I feel.
of yield is not
Let me
sufficient. It still tastes
print this out. Okay. The flavor of this cold brew espresso is very compelling, especially in the texture, and contrary to what you would expect, the aromatics of this cold brew espresso, specifically when you take the sips, is just very different from how espresso normally behaves. In this case, the cold brew, once it enters your palate, it starts to pick up some temperature with your body temperature that it is exposed to, and then it really opens up. It's like a little aromatic bomb that is going off in your mouth. And the applications are very diverse, knowing that cold brew coffee already is such a hot product. And that's an unlucky use of the word hot. Popular product, knowing that it's already so popular, it's really interesting to see what will come out of this. So this is just one example of all these cool things that are going on, which are also extra relevant because of the special fermentation protocols going on in the industry right now.
I'm so sorry I wasn't here. That looks fascinating.
Yeah, now I bought one of these machines for the lab, so I hope we will get this soon. Let's go on to our next topic, and that is basically the tip number 7 for this webinar. Invest in your brand. Valerian, why is this so essential, so important in your opinion?
It's everything. Like if you start to any coffee company or any company in the world, your branding is everything. When you come to our class, the Roasting Lab Pro business, we have a whole day talking about marketing and branding and concepts, how to build your coffee company. And I learned a great definition about branding. You know, there's so many definitions out there. Most of them are kind of boring, you know, but one definition which determines it all is branding is a gut feeling about your company. Just think about it. It's a gut feeling about your company. So you can always ask yourself, is this branding? Well, does it create gut feeling about your company? If it does, yes, it is branding. So with this definition, and it's so important, right? Because people don't know who you are, people don't know what you do, but sometimes they have a gut feeling what you stand for and can be or not be your customer. So it's super, super important.
And it's also important to emphasize that branding doesn't necessarily mean that you have to invest a fortune in very elaborate designs that are complicated and that are shiny. And some companies invest a lot of money in design. To give you one example, this is the logo of Boot Coffee, which is a logo that we developed some years ago, and it really represents what we are about. We try to extend our work not just on the roasting and on the brewing protocols, but also on what's happening in the farm, the quality of the bean, the essence, the extract, the brewed coffee, of course, and then finally what's going into the cup. So it represents the work that we do in this value chain. And excellent brands, they don't necessarily require elaborate designs.
And it's not only about design, it's also about your behavior, how you treat your customers, whether if the customers complain about your coffee, how you treat that, reviews and everything. So it's, again, does it create a gut feeling about your company? Yes, no, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that also opens up the door to the next, I would say, an important topic that we always teach in our Roasting Lab Pro business course, and that's know your cost of goods sold. Cost of goods sold, that's COGS, COGS. In a roasting business, you have many different types of costs. The two biggest ones are the cost of your green beans. The cost of green beans went up by 50 to 75% just in the past year on average. Labor is a major cost. I already mentioned, like here in California, what the labor cost can be. In Europe, also the labor cost can be quite high, but you also have to think of your cost for packaging materials, for logistics. With the rising energy prices, the cost for logistics has been increasing exponentially. And so once you know your cost of goods sold, then you can, of course, also do proper financial budgeting for accounting purposes. And for example, if a potential large client comes to you, let's say you are a wholesale roasting company, and a potential large client comes to you and wants to purchase ongoing large volumes of coffees from you. Let's say it could be a chain of coffee cafes that wants to buy your wholesale roasted coffee, then you will want to really do your calculation, your bottom line calculation really well, in order to understand whether or not the price that they're willing to pay is a sustainable price for you, right? Like in any other business, in coffee roasting, I've experienced this myself running coffee company in Europe, where we developed a wholesale roasting company with our family's company. You have this so-called the Pareto principle, which is a simple economic principle, which as a coffee roasting company, it basically says, that very likely a grand majority of your business, approximately 80% of your sales, will come with a relatively small number of clients, with about 20% of your clients. So the smaller, the bigger clients, which form in number a small number of companies, but the bigger client will dictate a major part of your sales. So that's very common also for coffee roasting companies. So you will always get into the situation where you will have to do your homework, your accounting homework really well. Valerian, maybe you want to add something to this, also knowing that you've been teaching about this a lot at our courses.
It's very, very important. I know some people who are like, I love to roast and I'm not sure about these numbers and stuff, but they are crucial. And they're also crucial in the beginning. If you are not roasting yet and you're thinking that, yeah, Giesen is a great place to start, you also have to make your math with this calculation, whether it's worth for you to roast. We had students on the Roasting Lab Pro who are, let's say, working in investment these days. And once we run the numbers, we have this amazing calculator on the course. Once we run the numbers, they realize, hey, I cannot make enough money. Well, if you're earning $500,000 a year, then with roasting, maybe it's not for you. Or other way around, that you basically realize with this calculator, the size of your roaster. That's always a topic here, right? What size of roaster do I need? Well, you don't have to fight about it. It's very simple. You run your numbers and it will give you a nice idea what size of roaster you need. So this is very important. And if I can pitch Roasting Lab Pro business, we'll do that whole day.
And we come to the same issues always when we help clients spec out their production equipment, for example, their new roasting machine, which we of course always hope it's a Giesen roasting machine, knowing that Giesen roasters are part of a premium segment. It means that there's a bit more investment required for the roasting company to get into this equipment, but there's a lot of benefits that come with this. And you will want to do your homework well. You will want to be able to calculate, what production volume, at what sales prices do you need to hit to be able to pay for your machine in the number of years that you have plotted out for that. So these are all compelling arguments why you need to know the cost of your goods sold. And we're getting nicely through this hour. We have quite a few more topics to share with you. And I still want to invite those of you who are watching, listening, to share your questions with us. And then we will try to answer these right now in this webinar, which also gives you the chance on a nice prize, one of the gift boxes that Giesen has been making available for this. So don't hold back on that. You can do this right here at the Q&A tab of this webinar, or you can send us an Instagram message. Let's go on to the next topic. This is a topic that obviously is always key where it comes, where do your beans come from? It's about building relationships with your green beans suppliers and also try to experience origin countries now that the world has been opening up again, fortunately. There are some tips that I have where it comes to dealing with green bean suppliers, and also tips that come to the countries that you might want to consider visiting now that traveling is fortunately quite a bit more feasible. First of all, where it comes to dealing with your importers, with your green bean suppliers, Valerian, do you have some general rules of the game that our clients should obey, that they should keep in mind?
Well, most of the time people ask me about samples, whether you should ask samples from your importer, and you 100% should. But on the other hand, you have to also realize that the importers need your feedback. So once you get your samples, don't think that you put them in a shelf and maybe roast them or not. You have to roast them. You have to cup them, right? Going back to the big number 3 or something like that, when you said cup. And you have to give the feedback back to your importer, because your importer will understand their own portfolio, but also understand what do you need, because maybe they can help you with tips, like maybe these coffees were not for you, but once they understand what's for you, they can give you better samples. So that's my main takeaway from this.
Yeah, and I think from talking to green coffee traders and importers, I hear so often their frustration about the fact that their clients, the roasters who solicit samples, that they don't get back to them about what they have cupped and how the impression was. And so there's those aspects you must keep in mind. When it comes to visiting origin countries, now that the world is opening up again, my top 4 countries right now, also based upon where we have a lot of interaction and work. Of course, Ethiopia, the homeland of Arabica coffee, the birthplace of Arabica coffee. Panama, where we are also teaching origin courses. We will have an origin course coming up in 2023 in January. Panama is one of the smallest coffee producers in the world, but it's such an amazing origin. There's so many amazing things going on in Panama. Colombia, I would say, is an origin that you should consider because it's the such a there's a question. Great. So first of all, let's go into this right away. So baked flavors can, of course, develop when you have, So the question is about, if your rate of rise is less than 2.5 degrees, I'm not sure if they're referring to Celsius or Fahrenheit, but let's say you're talking about Fahrenheit, because that would be a relatively low rate of rise. Rate of rise is typically calculated every 30 seconds. As long as you can keep it above 2 degrees Fahrenheit, which is very low, then you will not find necessarily baked flavors, on the condition that that rate of rise of 2 degrees or more is towards the end of the roast. And so if your rate of rise is 2 degrees or a little bit more, halfway the roast, and then your rate of rise is higher again later in the roast, that can get you into trouble of having baked-like flavors. What is baked flavor? Baked flavor is basically where the acidity of the coffee is getting very muted, hollow. And I also see there's another question that came in from Gareth, who is roasting now on a 15-kilo roaster, and he has he is planning to purchase a 30-kilo roaster. And so how do you duplicate flavors between the different roasters? So our advice is, take one specific coffee that you're very comfortable with, that you know very well inside out. Let's say it could be a Honduras Paraíso coffee. I'm just pulling a coffee out of a big hat. So you will want to roast that coffee on your current 15-kilo roaster. I assume it's a Giesen. And then in order to duplicate the flavor profile, apart from matching the roasting profile using your Giesen profiler, you will also want to match, apart from the roasting profile on the screen, you also want to match your flavor profile here, right? And so, because those are not always the same, for the simple reason is that these roasters are made by craftsmen. They are made with very specific materials. The location of a bean probe on a 15-kilo cannot be exactly duplicated on a 30-kilo. The relationship between heat supply and how the roasting profile develops on a 15-kilo is not necessarily the same as on a 30-kilo. So you will want to translate your roasting profile, your technical roasting profile in such a way that your flavor profile comes out very close?
Yeah, the best way how to test it is a technique called triangulation, which you can really see whether there is a difference between your two profiles on both roasters. If you want to test it yourself and you see a difference, you can always test it also on your customers, whether they see the difference. So it's triangulation is fascinating for this. It really can help you to understand.
And there's another question that came from so the question is, you're upgrading your capacity. You want to run more capacity on your machine, on your roasting machines. Let's say you go from a 10 kilo roaster, whatever brand it is, up to a 30 kilo roaster. Should you keep that old machine? Yes or no? My advice, keep it, because we're kind of in interesting times right now, geopolitically. At the same time, the market for roasting machines, used roasting machines, is always very hot. And again, that word hot is an interesting analogy in this context. So I would say keep that machine as long as your cash flow allows, because you can always sell it at any time for most likely the same price as you invested in it originally. And so another question would be, which we often get when folks upgrade from a 12 kilo roaster, and there are different manufacturers that produce 12 kilo roasters, and now they're upgrading to a Giesen 15A, which typically gives you a 50% capacity increase, because most 12 kilo roasters of some of these other brands, they're not really 12 kilo roasters. Well, the Giesen 15 kilo is a true 15 kilo machine. And so how do you translate the roasting profile on that older machine from that other brand to the Giesen machine? And I think, important to realize is that on Giesen machines, you have some extra tools to your availability, like pressure profiling, like drum rotation profiling, that you typically don't find standard on any other machine. And so don't overcomplicate this process of translating profiles. First, focus on matching final bean color and getting as close as possible in roasting time. Once you match those, then you start copying the two end results of your old machine versus your new Giesen W15. And then you start to look at how can you change within the profile that you set for your Giesen, the different time periods for your drying, for your Maillard, and for your caramelization phases. So those are the sequences that I recommend when you're trying to match one flavor profile from an older machine to a newer Giesen machine.
Can I address the previous question about the smaller roaster and big roaster? So
Please.
There's also practicality about that. So for example, in my European company, we have a small roaster and a big roaster. Your big roaster will be creating your main blends, your espresso, your main sellers. But don't forget, if you're working with specialty coffee and Giesens, you might end up roasting something like geishas or some very specialty lot with not too many people will buy. And that's where your small roaster will play your role. So I think to have a smaller, for example, W6 and a bigger one, W15 or even 30 kilo one would make a lot of sense for your company.
Samundra is asking us a question, good question. Is it okay to roast another batch while the cooling fan is still on and cooling the bean? If yes, does it have repercussions on the machine's efficiency? And if no, why shouldn't you do it? Great question. The key question I have back for you is, does your machine allow roasting and cooling at the same time? So does it have a fan dedicated to cooling separately from the fan dedicated to roasting. So if your machine does have this separate fan capability, then under normal conditions, it would be just fine to roast and cool at the same time. If your machine has an integrated airstream for both roasting as well as cooling, then you can get into trouble or into a challenge, because whatever air flow you take away from the roaster for cooling purposes will not allow you to roast efficiently and consistently. Now, there are ways to work around this, which I have experimented with in the past. Like you could still cool your previous batch and start roasting with limited, reduced airflow going through your drum as kind of a pre-drying cycle. That could be okay, but it's not an ideal option. The traditional limitation of roasting machines that have integrated airflows is just that. And as a result of that, such roasting machines will not give you more than 3 cycles per hour at the max, often a little bit less. And that's, you'll just have to take that for granted, and then prepare yourself financially to invest in the Giesen W6 or 15 or whatever capacity to be able to do roasting and cooling at the same time. The biggest challenge that I'm still struggling with at times is, the question is, what is my biggest challenge where it comes to roasting and setting roasting profiles? And my challenge, and very recently I was confronted with this challenge while I was copying all these special process protocols in Ethiopia, is that we decided, for good reasons, to cup all these different samples, but then we decided to re-roast those samples and re-cup them again. We decided to re-roast them again and re-cup them again. And every time we did a re-roasting and a re-cupping, we developed new perspectives about the flavor profile of that coffee. Meaning that I was confronted with the fact that these special process protocols, they require really to do much more research than I had ever considered before. So the biggest challenge I have become confronted with recently is with the big question of how to set consistent roasting protocols for these controlled fermentation coffees. And why is this topic so central also in this webinar? Because I feel this is becoming the new normal for the coffee industry. We see coffee producers doing this more and more and more. So my biggest challenge is exactly that we are in a very dynamic green coffee market. Coffee producers are discovering innovations, and we as roasters, we will have to catch up with this. And and then I had one final question that I just wanted to answer from Luke. In between batch protocols, there is written quite a bit of information about this over the past couple of years. In between batch protocols is really about, how do I keep the thermal balance of my machine without losing too much thermal energy. The beauty of it is that Giesen has this wonderful feature of this thermostat controlled burner, where you can actually set the burner to maintain a certain temperature over time. So your in-between batch protocols can be, the requirements for that can be met with this Giesen technology. Very simply, it's an integrated standard solution by the Giesen machines. And that is then the last tip: prepare really well with the right equipment for your roasting business. Obviously, you already thought that I was going to answer this, as I believe in, this is where you really need to get in touch with Giesen, with your local sales representatives, and visit us in the very near future at the new headquarters of Giesen. This was a fun webinar. I think we were trying to overload you with a lot of information. So if you feel confused, don't worry. Get in touch with us. You can do this through the Giesen website, giesencoffeeroasters.eu, and through the Boot Coffee website, bootcoffee.com. And we will be seeing each other through a series of YouTube videos that we are going to produce together with our friends at Giesen. And Valerian, do you have a final thought for today?
Yeah, I hope to guys see you also in our lab in Boot Coffee campus, where you can play with all those awesome Giesens. And if you come, we can also show you something interesting, how to profile cacao on these amazing Giesens. Giesen is excellent for working with cacao. We just played with it a little bit for the past year, and we are just amazed. So
very cool.
Come over.
All right. Thank you very much. Good luck today. Have fun this weekend, and we will be in touch. Thank you very much. Auf Wiedersehen. Au revoir. À bientôt.
Viszontlátásra, do widzenia, do widzenia.
All right. Bye-bye. Ciao, ciao.